Well, I got hit with a little bug. And how does international trade policy impact Virginia justice reform? I'm David Smith with Inthrive Advocacy, and welcome to my weekly update about all things justice reform and a little international trade policy at the Virginia General Assembly. You know, there's nothing worse than coming down with a fever in the middle of session. So, for the sake of everyone else, I stayed out of the GAB for most of this week. So, I was following everything online and in the paper, but the online version of the paper, of course. So, let's hop right into it. What moved this week? HB 2217, Council on First Appearance, passed with Delegate Wren Williams as the only R in the House. Cordoza, a delegate from down in Pocosin and Hampton who voted for it in subcommittee, did not cast a vote for the final floor vote. I don't know why, but there was no vote. Delegate Williams strikes me as a guy with ambition. Would not surprise me if he runs for statewide office very soon. I'm wondering if this is his way of trying to broaden his base. Will his rising star be enough to get Governor Youngkin's support? We'll have to see. Next up in the House, we go to HB 2196. This is to bring restorative justice to schools, and it got a hearing and some press. The press coverage has been really favorable, but the votes are staying party line. That means both delegates Coyner and Carrie, Republicans from the Tri-Cities who have shown interest in justice and education issues, are voting against this. Looks like the Republican caucus is saying no. So even if it does pass the House and Senate, which it will likely do, it would take some convincing to get the governor's blessing. Now on to probation reform with House Bill 2252, which is being spearheaded by the Reform Alliance. Now, this is a bill that incentivizes people to be successful through their probation period by shortening their supervision time if they hit certain benchmarks. Now, Delegate Williams, remember that lawyer that's a Republican from the western end of Southside Virginia that we were just talking about? Yeah, so he's the chief patron. But even with his backing, the only R's that are voting for it are from swing districts that will be facing Democratic challengers. There's Mark Earley from Chesterfield, AC Cordoza from Pocosin in the Hampton area, Delegate Carrie from Colonial Heights, and Delegate Carrie Coyner from the Hopewell area. So the idea here is to codify some of the directives in Governor Youngkin's executive order on reentry from 2024. While it looks like the Republican caucus is not taking a stand on this one, with so few R's voting for it, will Youngkin see it the same way as its supporters do, as codifying his executive order so that he signs it into law? We'll have to wait and see. And let me give a big shout out real quickly to Reform Alliance. They are doing a great job finding and working with Republicans who want to make improvements to our justice system. All right, let's go to some updates from bills we talked about last week. Okay, let's go to HB 1661, Universal Minimum Payments for Fines and Fees. After passing House Appropriations with only one no vote, it did get 36 no's on the floor. We'll have to see if more R's vote for it in the Senate. But 36, that might be a hard number for Youngkin to sign into law. HB 1894, the Don't Let People Freeze to Death in Prison bill, picked up a few R's in the House Appropriations, which seems to indicate that the Republican caucus has not taken a stance against this bill, which, why should they? Unless they really want folks in prison to get frostbite or heat stroke, but I digress. With crossover day on February 4th, every bill needs to be out of committee in their first chamber by this point. So if you're tracking a bill and it's still in committee, then it'll have to wait for next year with a new General Assembly. Now, the other thing we're waiting for is to see what happens with budget amendments. Usually we only see minor tweaks in non-budget years. All right, fun fact, a little inside baseball here. Virginia has a 2-year budget, and the outgoing governor gets to introduce the budget as one of his last official acts. So what makes this non-budget year so interesting is Virginia has a $2 billion surplus. Yes, $2 billion with a B dollar surplus. Now, before we get too excited, there are these tariffs that seem to be dominoing. And I'm not trying to make any predictions, but I will say the trade wars with China, Canada, and Mexico that seem to be inevitable at this point will change Virginia's budget outlook. Virginia's top 4 export partners in 2023 were Canada, China, India, and Mexico. Now, Canada, China, and Mexico, which also happen to be those same 3 that tariffs are now being put against, they accounted for $6.8 billion with a B of exports in 2023. $6.8 billion of exports. Now, to put this in perspective, Virginia only exports $5 billion worth of goods to all of the European Union. So these tariffs could have a huge impact on our budget and its surplus. Why? Because tariffs impact exports. So as these other countries put tariffs on our exports into their countries, it makes the products coming from Virginia that much more expensive, which means they will be importing less, which means Virginia's manufacturers and farmers will be selling less, which means we'll have less employees working, and the folks that are working less hours, and all that is less money coming into the Virginia coffers, which means that huge surplus could disappear. Now, the budget negotiators will be looking at all this as they decide which budget amendments to approve, which to deny, and we'll see how this impacts the ability to implement justice bills that are making their way through the General Assembly this year. Remember, even if a bill passes and gets signed into law, if there's no money to implement, it's meaningless at best, and at worst, it will void the law. Who knew? International trade policy has a direct impact on Virginia justice reform. Well, you never know what you'll find out. So check back next week for the next Inthrive Justice update to get caught up on what passed, what didn't, and what other interesting things are happening in justice reform here in Richmond.